Nobody in MotoGP imagined the silence that followed Valentino Rossi's words. It wasn't a cryptic message, it wasn't a joke, and it wasn't one of those playful comments he used to throw around during his racing years. This time, there was weight behind every syllable. He was asked a simple question about the future, about the riders who could shape the next era of MotoGP. And instead of giving the usual diplomatic response, Rossi leaned back, thought for a moment, and delivered a prediction that sent a shock through the entire paddock. A potential showdown. Two riders from completely different worlds. A clash of styles so extreme that engineers, analysts, and former champions immediately froze. Because what Rossi hinted at wasn't just another rivalry. It was a collision course that could redefine MotoGP's 2025 season. A duel between Pecco Bagnaia, the calm architect of Ducati's modern dominance, and Toprak Razgatlıoğlu, the wild, unpredictable force whose braking mastery has left entire teams bewildered. And according to Rossi, that showdown wouldn't be theoretical. It was coming. Soon. But nobody realized just how deep the story ran, or how many pieces were already moving behind the scenes. Most predictions in MotoGP fade in hours. Rossi's prediction did the opposite. It grew, it spread, it shook the walls of hospitality units before lunchtime. Because Rossi doesn't casually attach his name to a rivalry. Not unless he sees a spark, something that others have missed. Behind his calm tone, there was a hint of certainty. It wasn't a wild idea. It wasn't fan fiction. It sounded like Rossi was describing something already unfolding, something he'd glimpsed through the layers of political negotiations, technical evaluations, and personal ambitions that shaped the sport. Insiders whispered that the legend had been quietly following Toprak's evolution for years. They knew of his fascination with riders who push conventional limits, riders who weaponize chaos and transform mistakes into miracles. Toprak fit that mold perfectly. The paddock immediately wondered. Why mention Bagnaia specifically? Why emphasize a V4 showdown? And why now, with the 2025 season still forming in the shadows? But before anyone could make sense of it, another whisper surfaced, suggesting Rossi wasn't speculating at all. He was hinting at something he'd already heard. And that's when the anxiety inside the MotoGP garages began to build. Toprak's road to this moment wasn't a straight line. It was chaotic, explosive, and full of raw instinct that couldn't be engineered or predicted. What Rossi admired wasn't just Toprak's bravery, it was the precision behind it. Beneath the smoke and sliding and impossible late-braking maneuvers, there was a deeper layer of control that only a few riders in MotoGP history had ever mastered. VR46 Academy riders had privately discussed it. Some had even analyzed Toprak's braking traces, trying to understand how a human could repeatedly commit to such extreme entry points without crossing the limit. Rossi's belief came from experience. He had raced against the best of multiple eras. He knew what type of rider thrived on a V4, the kind that doesn't fear instability but welcomes it, bends it, reshapes it into a weapon. In Toprak, his entire career had been a rebellion against physics. So when Rossi made that prediction, it wasn't fan service. It was a statement built on years of silent observation and technical comparison. Some whispered that manufacturers had already been studying Toprak's data, not to replicate it, but to understand whether his techniques could survive MotoGP's brutal speeds. The verdict from those quiet evaluations: if he ever touched a V4 prototype, he might become something terrifying. And that possibility made engineers nervous. But Ducati, they were more intrigued than nervous. And that curiosity was about to take the story in a new direction. Inside Ducati, victory is celebrated, yet dominance creates pressure few teams understand. And by 2025, that pressure sits heavily on Bagnaia's shoulders. He is their masterpiece. Their reliable weapons. Their symbol of modern MotoGP excellence. But Ducati's success brings a new dilemma. Who comes after Bagnaia? Which rider could shape the next 5 or 10 years? Behind closed doors, Ducati's strategists had begun exploring names that didn't come from the usual MotoGP pool. They were studying atypical profiles, riders with unique braking philosophies, unpredictable corner entry behavior, and an instinct-driven style that could unlock the next phase of V4 evolution. Whispers circulated that Toprak's name appeared in some of those internal discussions, not as a replacement, but as a possibility, A wildcard that, if given the machinery, could cause an explosive shift in MotoGP's competitive landscape. This wasn't about undermining Bagnaia. It was about preparing for a future where Ducati could no longer rely on one pillar. And with Rossi speaking openly about a showdown, the idea no longer felt like fantasy. It felt like a storm gathering at the edge of the championship. But the real shock came weeks later, when Ducati's test data triggered a debate nobody expected. It started with a simple comparison, an engineer examining braking modulation patterns between MotoGP's top V4 riders and the most extreme world SBK profiles. One dataset stood out like a siren. Toprak. His technique didn't resemble a typical superbike rider. It resembled a MotoGP rider who hadn't been given a MotoGP bike yet. The consistency of his modulation. The timing of his release. The way he used instability as an advantage instead of a danger. It shocked analysts who had assumed the gap between superbike and prototype braking was impossible to cross without years of adaptation. A comment circulated quietly from a technical director. Give him a V4 and we'll see something we've never seen before. Fans caught wind of this remark through rumors on social media. And the narrative shifted instantly. Rossi's prediction wasn't dismissed anymore. It was studied, debated, treated like a breadcrumb leading toward a bigger truth. Every time Toprak dove into a corner at impossible speed, online communities replayed it frame by frame, imagining him on a Ducati. But the strongest reaction didn't come from fans or analysts. It came from Toprak's own camp, where things were far from calm. Publicly, his manager denied everything. Privately, the story was different. Meetings had happened. Calls had been made. Some teams wanted to understand his future intentions, even if nothing was official. Toprak was torn. He loved what he was achieving. But he couldn't ignore the allure of MotoGP, the ultimate test, the place where legends define themselves. According to insiders close to the situation, he felt a quiet frustration that his previous MotoGP test opportunities didn't showcase his true potential. The bike didn't suit him. The philosophy felt restrictive. But a V4, a machine built for brutal braking and violent direction changes. That stirred a different reaction. He knew that facing Bagnaia would be the tallest mountain he'd ever attempted to climb, but he also knew something else, something he didn't say aloud. Bagnaia's strength was precision. Toprak's strength was unpredictability. It was a clash that fascinated him as much as it intimidated him. And with Rossi putting that duel into the global conversation, Toprak felt a new pressure blooming from all directions. Yet he wasn't the only one feeling the strain. A quiet unease was beginning to form around Bagnaia himself. Pecco Bagnaia seldom reacts publicly to rumors. His strength is composure. His confidence comes from the subtle belief that no matter what happens around him, the Ducati remains an extension of his mind. But when he heard Rossi's prediction, he didn't brush it aside. He understood the implications immediately. If Rossi names you as a pillar of a showdown, it means the world sees you as the benchmark. But it also means a challenger is emerging. Bagnaia respected Toprak deeply. He knew that few riders in modern racing possess the audacity to move braking markers the way Toprak does, and even fewer could do it with repeatable precision. A rivalry built on contrasting philosophies fascinated him, but beneath that fascination there was a hint of pressure, subtle but present. Some engineers whispered that Ducati's curiosity toward Toprak added a new complexity to Bagnaia's world. A new expectation. A new story forming around him that he couldn't control. Still, he remained silent. But silence doesn't stop momentum. And soon, another influential voice echoed Rossi's message, pushing the paddock into full speculation mode. When a respected team principal was asked about future talent, he didn't dodge the question. He didn't mention rising MotoGP rookies or established names. Instead, he hinted that the most intriguing rivalry of the next era might come from outside the current grid. The implication was clear. Toprak and Bagnaia, two opposing styles, one battlefield, and suddenly everyone wanted to talk about it. Fans debated whether Toprak's creativity could dismantle Bagnaia's technical perfection. Analysts dissected hypotheticals about braking zones and tire management. Ex-writers suggested this might be the most electrifying stylistic duel since the golden era of MotoGP rivalries. Speculation became a storm, and that storm grew when whispers suggested Ducati was already considering how their future machinery could suit different types of riders. If Toprak ever entered MotoGP on a V4, who would step aside? Would Ducati restructure? Would the grid reshape itself to accommodate a rivalry that millions already wanted to see? Every prediction grew wilder. Every rumor grew louder. And then, as pre-season developments unfolded, everything started to make sense. During early testing, Ducati's prototype revealed subtle yet crucial changes in braking stability, adjustments that seemed almost tailored for someone with Toprak's aggressive entry habits. It didn't prove anything, but it sparked conversations everywhere. People began connecting dots that had never been meant to align. Then came another unusual moment. Members of Rossi's inner circle were seen speaking with individuals linked to a satellite Ducati structure. No details emerged, but the timing was impossible to ignore. Suddenly, Bagnaia's interviews shifted tone. He began speaking about embracing new challenges, about being ready for surprises the sport might throw at him. To analysts, those remarks sounded like a writer preparing for a storm, when he couldn't stop, only confront. And as all these threads intertwined, Rossi's prediction transformed from a surprising comment into something much more powerful. A signal, a warning, a glimpse into a future MotoGP rivalry that could ignite the most thrilling era in years. Because according to those closest to the situation, the pieces are already moving behind the paddock walls. And if everything falls into place, 2025 might deliver the showdown nobody expected, but everyone suddenly wants. Toprak Razgatlıoğlu versus Francesco Bagnaia. Artistry versus precision. Instinct versus architecture. Chaos versus calculation. A MotoGP V4 duel that could reshape the sport's entire identity.